The neon lights of Nexus Station flickered like dying stars against the perpetual darkness of deep space. Commander Jake Sullivan adjusted his dress uniform one last time before stepping into the Galactic Officers Club. The medals on his chest caught the artificial light, each one a testament to his victories against the rebel colonies of Kepler 442. Tonight was his night. Tonight, everyone would finally recognize him as the war hero he truly was. The club buzzed with conversation from officers representing dozens of worlds. Jake straightened his shoulders and made his way to the bar, where a small crowd had already gathered around another commander sharing battle stories. Perfect. This was his moment to shine. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying that practiced tone of authority. "I couldn't help but overhear you discussing the Kepler campaigns. I happen to have some first-hand experience with those particular conflicts." The group turned toward him, their expressions curious. Jake smiled, launching into his well-rehearsed tale. "The Battle of Crimson Ridge was where I truly made my mark," he began, gesturing dramatically. 3,000 rebel fighters thought they could hold that position against our forces. They were wrong. Dead wrong. He paused for effect, noting the impressed looks on several faces. "I personally led the charge that broke their lines. Took down their commander myself in hand-to-hand combat. The man never knew what hit him." A few officers nodded appreciatively, but Jake noticed one figure at the far end of the bar who hadn't turned around. A woman in a simple gray uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Something about her stillness bothered him, but he pressed on. "Of course, that was nothing compared to the siege of New Mumbai," Jake continued, his voice growing louder. 2 months of constant fighting. The rebels thought their underground bunkers would protect them. I proved them wrong with a tactical brilliance that still studied in military academies across the sector. The woman at the bar finally turned around, and Jake felt his breath catch. She was striking, with sharp features and eyes the color of storm clouds. But it wasn't her beauty that made him pause. It was the expression on her face. Cold, calculating, amused in a way that made his skin crawl. "Please continue," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent he couldn't place. "This is fascinating. Tell us more about your glorious victories against the Kepler rebels." Something in her tone should have warned him, but Jake was too caught up in his own narrative to notice. "Well, since you're so interested, I suppose I could share a few more details. The rebels were cowards, you see. They'd hit our supply lines and disappear into their rat holes before we could respond properly. But I developed new tactics, aggressive tactics. We started targeting their civilian support networks." The woman's smile grew wider, and Jake felt a chill he couldn't explain. "Civilian targets," she repeated slowly. "How very strategic of you, Commander Sullivan." Jake blinked in surprise. "How did you know my name? I don't believe we've been introduced." "Oh, but we have," she said, sliding off her barstool with fluid grace. "Though you wouldn't remember me. I was just another face in the crowd back then. Another rebel rat, as you so eloquently put it." The conversations around them began to die down as other officers sensed the tension building. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm, but the woman made no aggressive moves. Instead, she simply stood there, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "I'm Commander Lisa Chun of the Kepler Defense Corps," she said, extending her hand in a mockery of politeness. "Pleasure to finally meet the famous Jake Sullivan." Jake's blood turned to ice. Kepler Defense Corps. The rebels. But that was impossible. The war had ended 5 years ago with the complete surrender of the rebel forces. There were no survivors, no organized resistance left. "That's impossible," he stammered. "The KDC was wiped out. I made sure of that personally." Lisa's laugh was like breaking glass. "Wiped out? Oh, Commander, you have such a limited perspective on victory and defeat. Did you really think a few orbital bombardments and some surface raids could eliminate an entire resistance movement?" The other officers were backing away now, sensing that this conversation was about to become something far more dangerous than casual war stories. Jake tried to regain his composure, drawing himself up to his full height. "The official records show complete pacification of the Kepler system," he said firmly. Whatever you think you are, you're living in the past. The rebellion is over. The rebellion? Lisa tilted her head thoughtfully. Oh, you're absolutely right about that. The rebellion ended the day your forces murdered my family in their beds. The day you turned New Mumbai into a crater. The day you decided that civilian casualties were an acceptable price for your precious victory. She took a step closer, and Jake found himself backing against the bar. But you see, Commander, what rose from the ashes of that rebellion wasn't another doomed resistance movement. It was something far more dangerous. It was a network of survivors who learned patience, who learned to think beyond your simple military strategies, who learned to plan not just for revenge, but for justice. Jake's mouth went dry. You're threatening me, in front of witnesses. That's an act of war. War. Lisa's eyes sparkled with dark amusement. Oh, Commander! The war never ended. You just stopped paying attention to it. You declared victory and went home to collect your medals and your promotions, never bothering to check whether your enemies were actually dead. She reached for the collar of her gray uniform and pulled aside, revealing a jagged scar that ran from her collarbone to somewhere beneath the fabric. The tissue was raised and twisted, clearly from some kind of energy weapon. This is from the war your planet lost, she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the now silent club. The war you thought you won 5 years ago. The war that's been raging in the shadows while you've been playing hero at cocktail parties. Jake stared at the scar, his mind racing. What are you talking about? We won. The colonies surrendered. The treaties were signed. The colonies you knew about surrendered, Lisa corrected. The colonies that existed on your maps, in your databases, in your limited understanding of how we were organized. But you never really understood us. Did you? You saw a few rebel bases and assumed you'd found everything. You destroyed a handful of leaders and assumed you'd cut off the head. She let her collar fall back into place. But the image of that scar seemed burned into Jake's retinas. The truth is, Commander, you were fighting a decoy war. Every base you found, every leader you captured, every victory you celebrated was carefully orchestrated to make you feel successful while the real resistance went underground. Deep underground. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. That's impossible. Our intelligence was comprehensive. Our victory was total. Your intelligence was what we chose to show you, Lisa said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Every piece of information you gathered, every strategic advantage you thought you'd gained, every inside source you cultivated was part of an elaborate theater designed to convince you that you were winning a war you'd already lost. Jake looked around the club desperately, seeking support from his fellow officers, but found only shocked faces and calculating stares. Some of these people were looking at him with suspicion now, as if seeing him in an entirely new light. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Even if some of you survive, you're in no position to threaten anyone. You're scattered, leaderless, powerless. Lisa's laugh was genuinely delighted now. Scattered? Oh, Commander, you still don't understand. We're not scattered. We're embedded. Do you think I'm the only Kepler survivor who's made a new life in Terran space? Do you think I'm the only one who spent the last 5 years building new identities, new networks, new capabilities? She gestured around the club with casual confidence. Take a look around you, Jake. How many of these faces do you really know? How many of these uniforms have you verified? How many of these fellow officers have you served with long enough to be absolutely certain of their loyalty? The paranoia hit Jake like a tide. He found himself studying every face in the room, looking for signs of deception, for hints of Kepler origins. But of course, there was no way to tell. If they'd been operating under false identities for years. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Want? Lisa seemed to consider the question seriously. What I wanted was my family back. What I wanted was my home. What I wanted was justice for the thousands of innocent people you murdered in the name of peace and order. She paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. But since I can't have what I want, I'll settle for what I can get. And what I can get, Commander Sullivan, is the satisfaction of watching you realize that everything you thought you knew about that war was a lie. That every medal on your chest represents not a victory, but a failure of understanding so complete That would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Jake's hand trembled as he reached for his drink, needing something to steady his nerves. Even if what you're saying is true, what can you possibly accomplish? You can't restart a war that's already over. The systems are at peace. Peace! Lisa repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. Is that what you call it when the victors write the history books and the survivors are forced to pretend their suffering never happened? When war criminals receive commendations while their victims are forgotten? She leaned closer, and Jake could smell her perfume, something floral and completely at odds with the menace in her voice. The systems aren't at peace, Commander. They're in denial. And denial, as any good strategist knows, is the most dangerous state a military force can be in. It makes you vulnerable to attacks you never see coming. Are you threatening the Terran Federation? Jake asked, trying to summon some of his old authority. I'm stating facts, Lisa replied calmly. The Kepler survivors didn't disappear after your victory. We evolved. We adapted. We learned from our mistakes and from your tactics. And now, 5 years later, we're not the desperate rebels you remember. We're something new, something you're not prepared for. The club was almost empty now, with most officers having found reasons to leave rather than witness what was clearly becoming a very dangerous conversation. Jake realized with growing horror that he might be completely alone with enemies he couldn't identify. What's your endgame? He demanded. What's the point of all this elaborate revenge fantasy? Lisa's smile was genuinely warm now, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Endgame? Oh, Commander! You're still thinking like this is some kind of military operation with clear objectives and defined victory conditions. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. This is about truth. She turned away from him and began walking toward the exit, her steps unhurried and confident. The truth about what really happened in the Kepler system. The truth about how your glorious victory was built on the bones of children. The truth about how thoroughly you were outmaneuvered by people you considered primitive colonists. She paused at the door and looked back over her shoulder. Sleep well tonight, Commander Sullivan. Tomorrow, the real war begins. Jake Sullivan didn't sleep at all that night. He sat in his quarters aboard the Federation cruiser Valiant, staring at his medals and commendations, trying to make sense of Lisa Chen's words. Every official record confirmed his version of events. The Kepler rebellion had been crushed. The colonies had surrendered unconditionally. Peace had been restored to the sector. But doubt was a poison that spread through his thoughts, contaminating every memory of the war. Had there been signs he'd missed? Intelligence gaps he'd dismissed too casually? Lisa's confidence suggested she knew things he didn't, and that possibility terrified him more than any direct threat. A soft chime interrupted his brooding. His personal communicator was receiving an encrypted message on a channel he didn't recognize. The sender was listed as Ghost Protocol 7. Against every instinct screaming at him to delete the message, Jake opened it. Commander Sullivan, by now you've had time to consider our conversation. If you're ready to learn the truth about your war record, meet me at Docking Bay 12 in 1 hour. Come alone. Come unarmed. And, Commander, don't disappoint me by trying to involve station security. They won't be able to help you. Jake stared at the message until it auto-deleted 30 seconds later. Every rational part of his mind told him this was a trap. Lisa Chen was clearly unstable, possibly delusional, certainly dangerous. The smart move would be to report the encounter to his superiors and let Federation intelligence handle whatever remained of the Kepler survivors. But Jake had spent his entire career building his reputation on the foundation of the Kepler victory. If there was even a chance that foundation was cracked, he needed to know. He needed to understand what he was really facing. 57 minutes later, he found himself walking through the dimly lit corridors of Nexus Station toward Docking Bay 12. The station was in its sleep cycle, with minimal foot traffic and reduced lighting. Perfect conditions for an ambush, he realized grimly. The docking bay was empty, except for a single figure standing beside a sleek courier ship he didn't recognize. Lisa Chun had changed out of her uniform, and now wore civilian clothes that somehow made her look even more dangerous. She wasn't alone. Two other figures flank her at a respectful distance, their faces hidden in shadow. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lisa said as Jake approached. "It would have been disappointing, but not surprising, if you'd chosen to hide behind Federation protocol." "I'm here," Jake replied, stopping well outside what he estimated to be striking distance. "Now explain what you meant about the truth." Lisa gestured toward her companions, and they stepped forward into the light. Jake's blood chilled as he recognized them. Marcus Webb, supposedly killed in the Battle of Crimson Ridge. Sarah Martinez, reported dead in the siege of New Mumbai, both wearing the faces of people he'd personally confirmed as casualties. "Impossible," he whispered. "Improbable," Marcus corrected with a grin that Jake remembered from intelligence briefings. "But not impossible. Did you really think we'd make it easy for you to verify our deaths? A few DNA samples, some stage body recoveries, a couple of well-placed witnesses creating false casualties is surprisingly simple when you control the battlefield cleanup." Jake's mind reeled. If these people were alive, how many others had faked their deaths? How many of his infirm kills were actually elaborate deceptions? "The siege of New Mumbai," he said slowly. "I watched the bunker collapse. I saw the thermal imaging. There were no survivors." Sarah laughed, and the sound was like acid. "You saw what we wanted you to see. The bunker you destroyed was empty except for some very sophisticated holographic projectors and a lot of carefully placed heat sources. The real command center was 3 kilometers away, completely undetected by your scanning equipment. But the orbital bombardment, targeted exactly where we wanted it targeted, Lisa interjected every coordinate you received, every intelligence report that guided your strikes, was carefully crafted to destroy empty buildings while leaving our actual infrastructure intact." Jake felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "That's not possible. Our intelligence networks were extensive. We had sources throughout your organization." "You had sources," Marcus agreed cheerfully, "every single one of whom was working for us. Did you really think we wouldn't notice Federation agents trying to infiltrate our ranks? We fed them exactly the information we wanted you to have." The implications were staggering. Jake tried to process what they were telling him, but it felt like trying to rebuild a house while the foundation crumbled. "Even if that's true," he said desperately, "you still lost the war. Your colonies surrendered. Your government collapsed. Your military was disbanded. Our government," Lisa said with elaborate patience, "was a puppet show designed to give you something to defeat. The real leadership was never exposed to your operations. As for our military being disbanded, well, look around you." She gestured to her companions and then to herself. "We're all Federation officers now, Commander, at least according to our service records. Marcus here has been serving aboard the Dreadnought Titan for 3 years. Sarah's been stationed at Luna Command, working on strategic planning. And I've been teaching at the War College, educating the next generation of Federation officers about the importance of thorough intelligence gathering." The irony was like a knife twist. Jake staggered backward, his worldview collapsing around him. "How many?" he asked weakly. "How many what?" Lisa's eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "How many survivors? How many infiltrators? How many of your fellow officers are actually former enemies?" She pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, that would be telling, wouldn't it? But I will say this. Remember Admiral Harrison, who recommended you for your Medal of Honor. Lovely man, very supportive of your career. He's been quite helpful in placing qualified personnel in key positions throughout the fleet." Jake's legs gave out, and he found himself sitting heavily on a cargo container. Admiral Harrison had been his mentor, his champion within the Federation hierarchy. If Harrison was compromised, the entire command structure, he breathed. "Oh, not the entire structure," Marcus said reassuringly. "That would be inefficient. We only needed to place people in positions where they could influence information flow, personnel assignments, and strategic planning. Quality over quantity, as they say." Sarah pulled out a datapad and began scrolling through information. "Let's see. Operation Crimson Dawn was your idea, wasn't it, Commander? The one that's being implemented next month across 3 star systems?" Jake nodded numbly. Crimson Dawn was his masterpiece, a comprehensive security upgrade designed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration they were describing. Lovely plan, Sarah continued. Very thorough. Fortunately, the implementation team includes 17 officers with Kepler connections. They've made some fascinating modifications to your security protocols. Nothing obvious, you understand. Just small changes that will ensure the new systems have some interesting blind spots. The scope of the manipulation was breathtaking. Jake realized he was looking at an intelligence operation that spanned years, possibly decades. The Kepler survivors hadn't just faked their deaths and assumed new identities. They'd systematically infiltrated and compromised the entire Federation military structure. Why? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just disappear and start new lives somewhere else? Lisa's expression grew cold and distant, because forgetting would be a betrayal of everyone who actually did die in your war. Commander, because allowing war criminals to be celebrated as heroes perpetuates a system that creates more war criminals. She walked closer, and Jake found himself unable to move away. But mostly because the Kepler colonies weren't just our homes. They were our responsibility. When you declared war on us, you declared war on our children, our elderly, our civilians. When you decided that collateral damage was acceptable in pursuit of your objectives, you chose to become the kind of enemy that can never be forgiven. Her voice grew softer, more intimate, which somehow made it even more menacing. So we chose to become the kind of enemy you never see coming. The kind that waits. The kind that plans. The kind that turns your own victories into the weapons that destroy you. Jake forced himself to look up at her. What happens now? Are you going to kill me? Lisa seemed genuinely surprised by the question. Kill you? Oh, Commander! That would be far too simple. Death would make you a martyr. It would validate your narrative about being a heroic soldier facing dangerous terrorists. She smiled, and Jake realized he'd never seen an expression quite so terrifying. No, we're going to do something much worse than kill you. We're going to let you live with the knowledge of what you really are, what you really did, and what's going to happen to everything you thought you built. Marcus stepped forward, holding another data pad. Tomorrow morning, the Federation News Network will begin a series of investigative reports about the Kepler War. They'll have access to previously classified documents, including communications logs, battle reports, and some very interesting video footage from your operations. The public will learn about the civilian casualties you covered up, Sarah added, about the war crimes you committed, and then classified to protect Federation interests, about the way you manufactured evidence to justify increasingly brutal tactics. Jake shook his head frantically. Those records are sealed. They're classified at the highest levels. Classified by people we spent 5 years learning to influence, Lisa said patiently. Did you really think we'd go to all this trouble just to have a conversation? This meeting isn't about revenge, Commander. It's about timing. She checked her chronometer with casual precision. In approximately 6 hours, the first news reports will break. By the end of the week, you'll be the most hated man in Federation space. Your medals will be revoked, your record expunged, your name synonymous with the worst kind of military excess. The weight of it crashed down on Jake like a collapsing building. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved, everything he was about be destroyed by the very people he'd thought he'd defeated. But that's still not the best part, Lisa continued, her voice bright with anticipation. The best part is that this is just the beginning. Every officer who served under you, every superior who promoted you, every politician who used your victories for their own advancement, they're all going to have to answer some very difficult questions. She gestured broadly, encompassing not just the docking bay, but the entire station, the fleet, the Federation itself. The scandal is going to tear apart the command structure we spent 5 years infiltrating. In the chaos that follows, certain personnel will be well-positioned to assume greater responsibilities. People with impeccable records and strong recommendations from trusted sources. Jake finally understood the true scope of what they'd accomplished. This wasn't just revenge against him personally. It was a coordinated campaign to destabilize and ultimately control the Federation military from within. You're staging a coup, he said in wonder. We're exposing the truth, Lisa corrected. The coup happened 5 years ago, when you and people like you decided that might makes right and winners write history. We're just editing the history books. She turned to leave, then paused as if remembering something important. Oh, and Commander? When the investigations begin, when they start looking for scapegoats and explanations, you might want to consider cooperating. Tell them everything you know about the chain of command, the decision-making process, the cover-ups. It won't save you, but it might save some lives. Jake watched helplessly as the three figures walked toward their ship. At the boarding ramp, Lisa looked back one final time. That scar I showed you last night? I got it defending a school during one of your tactical strikes. 43 children died in that attack. Commander, 43 children who never had the chance to grow up and become the kind of people who plan elaborate revenge schemes. Her voice carried clearly across the empty docking bay. Sleep well tonight, Jake Sullivan. Tomorrow you get to find out what losing a war actually feels like. The ship's engines hummed to life, and Jake sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about victory, defeat, and the price of both. Outside the viewports, the stars looked different somehow, less like distant suns and more like the eyes of judges, watching and waiting to see what kind of man he'd choose to be in the aftermath of discovering what kind of man he'd already become. The war for Kepler was over. The war for Jake Sullivan's soul was just beginning.